Pastor Steve here, and today we're continuing our journey through the Bible cover to cover, and we are looking at February 7 and the book of Exodus, and we're going to be looking at Exodus 20 to part of chapter 22. Now, the section we're beginning with in chapter 20 begins the first recording of the Decalogue, or the 10 words, or the 10 commandments. And so you can see it as it was first delivered by the Lord to Moses. Now, when we look at these laws, and we're going to be in the law for quite some time now, you're going to hear a lot of instructions, and you're going to be asking a very reasonable question. How do these laws impact us today? In some respects, it's like looking at the bylaws or constitution of a different church or a different country than you're a part of, because this is the beginning of a theocracy. And the foundation of these laws are God calling a people to himself, identifying a covenant. In other words, we have a relationship one with another, God to his people, a people to their God. And some of these laws are about being distinctive as compared to the other nations around. And so when you go through these laws, here's a good principle to go by. If it is a moral principle, something that you can see a connection in terms of how you live your life, that principle remains for all time. Case in point, keeping the Sabbath holy, that we have a Sabbath rest in our life. Now, as we look at this through the New Testament, we see we're obeying the spirit of the law. But should you, as a Christian, apply a principle of Sabbath rest? Absolutely. Don't covet. Don't commit adultery. Don't murder. These are obviously principles for all time and to be paid attention to. But you're going to come across other elements of law that are going to make you maybe uncomfortable. For example, there are instructions on slavery. What? The Bible allowed for slavery? It did. But there's some interesting elements that you must not miss. For example, we look at this passage through the eyes of the 21st century. When one looks at it through the eyes of when it was written, we find something radically different. There are rights of the slaves. Well, that's very interesting. Other countries in the Middle East didn't have rights for the slaves that we've seen through archaeology that's come down to us. We also see something like after 6 years of servitude, you're released on the 7th year. And you're released with your goods. And if you married, your wife stays with you and she's released also. So when we have this knee-jerk response of how could they have something like this, seeing it in the context of the world that they are in, we find that these laws actually reflect a very progressive attitude as compared to where they end up. I'm not saying that there aren't questions. There are interesting questions to be dealt with, but one has to see it in the lens of the world that they are in. Another interesting element is in the Decalogue that says punishing sin to the 3rd and 4th generation. In other words, if I sin as a parent, it impacts my children. And you're like, that doesn't sound fair. Well, first of all, I need to say that is the old covenant, because this is going to be reversed in the new covenant, and this will be indeed mentioned as we move forward, particularly in the book of Jeremiah, which speaks of this new covenant. But what I want you to notice here is it's a real principle. For example, if I am an alcoholic, is there a probability that my children will be alcoholics and their children will be alcoholics? Yes, there is. But I also read in that same passage that if I have a life-changing experience, that life-changing experience can continue to the 1,000th generation. That's good news, which means if you get your life squared away, it's going to also impact your children for the good. There's also an interesting section in this passage about if a baby, a woman carrying a baby, the baby is killed or damaged, and how is that to be responded? Some people look at this passage and see, the baby's value is not the same as the mama's. Not so. Number one, the Hebrew words are somewhat opaque here, but what we see is the deep value of human life, and that it is credited under the principle of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Now, by the way, when you read that term, eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, it wasn't perceived as literal. It means that there must be commiserate response. You steal somebody's car, you need to bring that car back, or the equivalent worth of it. That's the basic meaning of eye for an eye. It is an idiom. It is a principle. All in all, going through these laws, you're going to learn a lot. You're going to experience a lot. Understand the undercurrent moral principle. That is what carries us through and how we live our lives today. God bless you. We'll see you tomorrow.